And those are all good points. And you're right. The Battle of the Planets does seem to be the framework for a lot of things that would come later on in animation. My first one that I want to go over is another old animated show, but it also sets the framework for a lot of other shows of the time. And another show much more recent that some people might be more familiar with. But this show is Johnny Quest.
Mm.
And Johnny Quest, I loved it because the little group of adventurers went to exotic lands and they fought big threats. Another thing I liked about it is that it had like two main adult characters and then it had the kids. The show was primarily about what the kids did. Mm. And it kind of gave viewers a look into the life of an adventurer, not so much as like it was a young kid that was off doing his own thing, but like how, as a GM, you can have an NPC that kind of is a mentor to the group that doesn't do everything for the group. You know, anybody whose GM is repeatedly creating an omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient DMPC that's always there doing everything for the party, they need to be tied to a chair and made to watch Johnny Quest, because as awesome as Race Bannon is and as smart as Dr. Quest is, they are not the stars of the show, but Johnny and Haji are. They're the ones running from the enemy. They're the ones that are finding the traps. They're the ones that are doing most of the stuff. Now, every once in a while, Doc and Race come in and they maybe save the day and do whatever, but they're not always hogging all the limelight and the adventure. And there's a lot of times that GMs that feel like they don't have enough players and they need to insert a PC to help round out the group, they fall into that trap. So, you know, Johnny Quest is a really good place to mine for not just adventures to unique locales, but how to like manage that divide between a main character and a support character. And, you know, I could go on and on about that show's spiritual descendant, the Venture Brothers, because Venture Brothers kind of flips the script because it's got an A show and a B show, because there's usually shit going on with the adults and the sons in the Venture Brothers. So it's got multiple main characters. And I gotta say that the other thing that I love about that show is that both of those shows is that they're constantly going to places and doing weird shit, and they have like a network of enemies and they're fighting the minions of the enemies, but they're never getting to a point where they are beating the main bad guy because they're reoccurring. And that's nice, a nice kind of skill to cultivate as a GM, because it makes that final confrontation with villain X that much sweeter. When you've had to work your way through multiple layers of the onion and finally defeat them, that's nice. Now, in a cartoon, you know, you want to have that villain available in season 2, season 3, season 4, so maybe they will never beat them. But, you know, in D&D, in role-playing games, you got to give them a chance to finally beat the enemy at the end of season 2.
Right. And
then don't bring them back, because then that cheapens their previous victory. But that's what I love about Johnny Quest.
Yeah, so now, just thinking about setting, a good show to bring up is Thundercats. I totally dug Thundercats. I liked the premise that they are from this other planet that got destroyed. They're settling in on this new planet of Third Earth and running into all sorts of different inhabitants and creatures. They have the one big bad villain, then they have like the secondary villains running around that either want to take something from them or want to do something in the area that they're in. I find it interesting because it had a lot of exploration type of elements to it. You're on this new planet. You're trying to carve your way to make it's like a survival type of thing. And you also meet with other cultures. You are willing to help these other cultures if they're being exploited by these villainous creatures and all that kind of stuff. So it's a good show to take from certain elements, especially if you want to do like an exploration, the great unknown, finding out what the big bad is all about. So I go for Thundercats with that.
Okay. Thundercats was one of those when I was making the bus analogy. Thundercats came on probably about 15 minutes before I got home. So it was one of those shows that I could always watch like half of, and I was like, what the hell is going on?
Right.
So, I was like, I was never able to get into it because I could only catch the tail end of it, and eventually I just gave up. And, it would suck because it took a while, when I had to ride the bus for 45 minutes. I go to school and my buddy Roger be like, "Oh, Thundercats was so awesome." I'd be like, "I don't want to talk to you right now." So like, I always hated that so
You
much.
had to ride a bus. I had to walk. But
Yeah,
then my school was right down the street. It was like a block away. So
it was a pretty. But I read a lot of books on that bus growing up. So, but a cartoon that I watched and loved way before I was ever able to touch any role playing stuff was the D&D cartoon. And it's funny because the cartoon came out right about the time that the Satanic Panic was starting to take hold. It's so funny. Like, it's okay as a cartoon, but don't you bring any of the devil books in my household. But the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon was probably one of the things that spurred the imagination of a lot of people in our generation's interest in the game. It definitely was like a mass market push for this silly little board game, this tabletop game. And it took a lot of elements of the game and just kind of like gave them a pop culture spin before people even understood what pop culture was. So again, they kind of went with a little bit of the format. There was the leader, there was the hothead, there was the kid, there was the girl, two girls, and a redhead and the dark skinned girl, and they were both cute in their own way. And then they had two kids. One of them was the nerdy kid, and then one of them was the little brother. And that group, you kind of saw them for a brief moment in the new D&D movie, which was an amazing homage back to this cartoon. But even to this day, you're gonna see bits and pieces of the Dungeons and Dragons stuff kind of like popping through in like the art and stuff. I mean, Hank's bow is one of the most requested things that I see when people play a ranger.
I wanted to play a ranger in the first place.
There you go. Like those characters and what they went through. It was the first exposure to a lot of the standard Dungeons and Dragons things that are out there. And so it might be odd to have this cartoon on a list of things that inspire your Dungeons and Dragons campaign. But the thing that I like about it was that it took people that did not know anything about that world, and each episode was a teaching moment for the group. Right. And if you've got a lot of players that are new to Dungeons and Dragons, aside from what they've seen on Critical Role or wherever, if they've only know Dungeons and Dragons from watching the kids roll the math rocks on Stranger Things, they're not going to know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, the game. So not only do you as the game master have to like paint this world in their imagination, you got to teach them the mechanics too. And Dungeons and Dragons kind of did that to a pretty wide audience back in the day.
Yes. And honestly, I was playing D&D before the show came out, but it was good to see that, it was being represented on television and it wasn't like a dirty little secret, type of thing. Not that we had to deal with that satanic panic shit where I was from. Our parents just didn't worry about it too tough because we were all in the house. We weren't running the streets or doing all sorts of, detrimental stuff to get us locked up. So as long as we were in the house. But the next show that we're going to get into, I think, lends to the storytelling, especially storytelling of a longer arc, an epic type of thing. This is Robotech. This is my number one show. I couldn't miss it. I had to have it when it was out on VHS, them big old cassette tapes that you put in a VCR. I had them, all that kind of stuff. So I know a lot about this show. And the main thing was that it had a great storytelling arc. You started with characters, they developed them. You saw them go through changes, you saw them grow, you saw some of them actually die. Now that was the first show like that they actually showed a character dying, two characters in the first series, and well, just to see people dying in general, because it was just combat after combat after combat. You saw the valiant efforts of the Earth forces, getting beat the hell up. So it was a great storytelling thing that you can grab all sorts of elements from it. You can take what happens if you are as Entrada, you find out that this whole Earth culture is different from yours and you want to learn more about it, that you can mine that kind of element. You can mine, if you are into the romantic type element, you can have characters that may or may not fall in love triangles, all sorts of stuff. I'm a big soap fan, so I love that aspect as well.
I was gonna say that, Jason. I was gonna let you run your explanation all the way out, and I was gonna say, like, you love Robotech because it's a soap
Soap
opera with
opera.
giant robots. That's why
Exactly.
you love Robotech.
Yep. Couldn't miss it. Couldn't miss it. And just the continuing drama and the way, and it was everybody. Well, most people know that it was three different shows that they merged together and tried to make a cohesive storyline in different eras. So I think they did that well because it still stands to this day as a good show. And there's plenty of stuff you can use from each of the segments of that series.
Well, my next one is it was a show that was destined for failure. It was also a group of people that came together to defend the Earth. Matter of fact, the name of the group was Defenders of the Earth, and it's an odd choice because it does not have that big of a footprint in pop culture. It was a one season cartoon that was created by a newspaper animation syndicate. But basically, these were characters that were part of like the dailies. These little serial adventures that were like 5 or 6 panels would be published, and tune in tomorrow for the next installment of The Phantom. And these the main characters were the Phantom. There was a movie in the 90s made on this guy, Flash Gordon, which he's been in back and forth in pop culture from time to time, and then a guy called Mandrake the Magician, and then some other characters that were like surrounding them. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up is that now they were facing one villain from one of those characters, Ming the Merciless, the most famous of their villains. But it was multiple characters from all over the place that came together against one threat. Mm-hmm. And each week you saw a little bit about what was going on in each one of their kind of like backstories. The Phantom, he got his abilities because of jungle law, and his descendants did something noble, and now all of the Phantoms can do blank. Mandrake the Magician is the master of magic, and he studied with X, Y, and Z. And Flash Gordon, he's some space guy that went to space, came back, and he had a really big enemy from outer space. So you got like 3 totally different backgrounds. Sound like anything else you're familiar with? Like that Dungeons and Dragons party with backstories from all over the place? So like this show took 3 characters that had nothing to do with each other and like on a weekly basis threw them into stuff. And each one of the other characters, they're together for reasons. and that is the kind of cohesiveness that's built because of what happens during the adventure. And it's nice when two people make up a character. Two people make up two characters, and they're like, oh well, our characters have known each other for a long time. But it's when the other characters meet and then they choose to become part of the gaming group. That's kind of, as a GM and players, those are the kind of things that are cool. How are you going to integrate this new person into the group? How long before they're one of the team, or just the fucking new guy? And yeah, I'm talking to my friend that's the fucking new guy that just joined our Friday night group. We're role playing that little thing right now. So we've had a brand new cast member that's come in like season 5 of our Friday night adventure, and it's a little rough getting things started, but maybe by the middle of the season he'll be one of the team. So that's kind of what I liked about Defenders of the Earth, that there was just 3 guys from all over the place, and they're together to do this great thing. And that speaks to me a lot for like a lot of like gaming groups.
Right. Banded together from across different galaxies.
Wow, sounds familiar.
Like the next one. Yes. Super Friends. So we're going to talk about that show. Of course, it's Super Friends, based on the DC comic characters, Superman, Batman, everybody. Wonder Woman.
Can we just say Justice League?
Justice League.
Plus everybody else.
Plus everybody else. So, of course, you can mine especially if you're doing superhero campaigns or superhero games. You can take villain X from the Super Friends or whoever you want to use for that. But more importantly, it went into different eras. The Super Friends had like multiple seasons where they started with the Wendy and Marvin thing, and the lesson of the week type thing.
God, I can't remember. The show was on for so long. It
was on for a little while, yes. And sometimes they did lots of retreads and stuff. But when they got to where it was Challenger Super Friends, we were actually seeing the actual DC villains, Lex Luthor and Bizarro and Black Manta, who nobody knew was black, but and all of them, Cheetah and whatnot. So that made a good impression for me, being a big comic book fan, to see those characters animated as a youngster,
right,
4, 5, 6, type of stuff, and progress further and further on. So definitely a show that you can go back. You got episodes on YouTube. You can see some of the wild plots that they use.
Oh my God, yes.
You could try and incorporate that in your game if you want to, but it's always inspiration. You never know what you can find.
And one of my things I love about Super Friends is that it was the first time seeing, like Jason said, comic book characters on a screen and having them have voices to me. I mean, there have been other incidences of that before Super Friends, but in my youth, this was the big one. This every Saturday, watch this come hell or high water. And like the words, meanwhile in the Hall of Justice, those words still echo in my soul. And I'm a 50-year-old guy. So that show, I don't remember it good enough to list incidents where I could mine it for inspiration, but I know it's definitely a big inspiration for me. Now, one that I watched a lot, which Jason may differ in my opinion here, but the next one I'm going to talk bad about and then explain why it's here for inspiration to what to stay away from. And then I'm going to give Jason enough rope to hang me with what I'm about to say, because the cartoon He-Man is an absolute animation example of main character syndrome brought to life. because
Uh,
He-Man is absolutely the star of the show because it's He-Man. I mean, it might as well be called He-Man and His Amazing Friends that aren't quite as amazing as He-Man. Every week there's like a special boutique character with this one weird ability that might be useful in this one situation, except at the end, He-Man's just going to beat the crap out of whatever the enemy is anyhow. And,
mhm.
there's maybe a little bit of similarity with that in our Friday night game, but I digress.
Well,
The whole thing that when I look at He-Man, you got the weird cast of characters and the villain that's like constantly throwing like,
all
I
kinds
could
of
say
shade.
I got ready to say nameless henchmen, but no, every one of the henchmen had an absolutely
Yeah,
puntastic name,
exactly.
and most of his allies did too. But
Mhm.
it's the main character syndrome. Like everything in that cartoon, as much as it might be like D&D adjacent, it's always based around that conflict between the main character and the main adversary. And
Yes.
it's a very good example of what not to do in your narrative world. You can the crazy cast of characters that were around him are kind of cool, but you don't want all the focus to be on that one character. And at the end of the day, in animation, that's what I took away from He-Man. Because, I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, every He-Man episode was kind of the same thing. So
Yeah. I mean, well, Skeletor had the greatest shade ever.
that is true. I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody, oh God, I shouldn't say this out loud because somebody's gonna like scan me with the mind ray and put this on the internet. But if somebody wants to get like the absolute perfect cut down track back and forth, if they go through the Clone Wars and take out Obi-Wan Kenobi, the Jedi Master of shit talking, all of his stuff out of the Clone Wars, and then splice that with Skeletor, like the two of them like spitting back and forth at each other, that would be fucking comedy gold. Because absolutely, because you're right, Skeletor,
Don't
he
try
was
it,
a
you idiot. I have the high ground.
I can see you have the high ground because you don't have a bone to stand on. I could just see the two of them going back and forth with shit like that all the time.
So now I can't. I don't know what to say about that. I know you're coming from that angle, but I He-Man was He-Man. It was the show that was. I'm not even going to get into the homoerotic thing, but anyway, uh, we're going to move on to
I,
another.
I honestly thought you were going to be like, oh, wait, Mister, I like to play characters with strength, and I've been known to be the mouthpiece of the party sometimes. I
Yeah,
thought you were
yeah,
going to call me out on that, but
too easy. Yeah, I mean,
was it too easy?
yeah,
Would it have been
'cause
too easy? Okay,
it
all
was
right.
too easy. I mean, you telling on yourself. That's good enough for me.
Well, I mean,
I,
everybody knows it.
exactly.
But I try. Unlike He-Man, it's not like silence, Orko. Let me explain the magic to the other sorceress. I never do that shit. It's
Mhm.
like
All right, but moving along, we're going to get into another show um, that was definitely an inspiration. That is Transformers. It revolutionized television in a way. You had these robots transform into cars and whatnot. It had a very good comic book run as well. So if you were into both, you can get all sorts of ideas from the shows as well as the comic book. Um, the movie was funny to me. I always got to tell this about Transformers the movie because it was me and my cousin in the movie theater watching this. We were like 11 because it came out like 86. So we came out, I was like 11, 12 years old, something like that. And we sitting here, a whole bunch of kids, like 5, 6, 7 years old. And when Optimus Prime dies, spoiler alert, Optimus Prime gets, killed and whatnot. All these kids started crying and bawling their eyes out. I'm like, oh my God, they're traumatized. They are just going through it right now. And me and my cousin just looking at each other like, okay, he's dead. Moving on. But anyway, that's another thing you can mine from that the experience of how a character, main character or whatever, dies or whatever, and have to move on and go on from that. Um, so many different things you can do with Transformers. The the new movies I won't comment on, but we'll just we don't got nothing to say about that. So
I
what you got
I mean,
next?
Transformers is. I mean, I had toys and I watched the cartoon. It
Mhm.
didn't really get any traction with me. I mean, I guess the idea of like somebody's Cadillac turning into a robot and punching an enemy, it just didn't, strike me all that much compared to some people. I don't know. As much as I like robots and other shit, that Transformers was never like that big of a thing for me. But oddly enough, this next one is another one that kind of like flew under the radar for quite a while. It's Thundar the Barbarian, and
Mm,
that one for me is really
it's riffs.
it's exactly it's a post-apocalyptic world where magic has come back.
Mhm,
There's humans, there's sorcery, there's Ukla the Mock, one of the best,
mhm.
strong guy. And that's the thing, Jason, you open this up with Battle of the Planets. You got the leader, the
Yes.
hothead, the girl, the kid, and the big ethnic guy. So you got five types, and all five of them are represented in one group, but the the leader is the leader, hothead, and the kid all at the same time. Then there's the girl, and then the ethnic guy. You can't get much more ethnic than the big Ukla the Mock. We don't even know what species he is. I mean, he's called the Mock, but that could be a
Mhm.
title. Maybe that's the
Yeah.
race. We don't know, because when you ask Ukla about it, he goes,
Yeah.
you just
Mhm.
don't know. Thundar the Barbarian, if you've never seen it, it happens on a world after some huge ecological disaster, some
The
war,
moon got
some
split in half.
something.
I'm
Yeah,
like, damn.
it's huge, and there's just weird shit everywhere. And the main character, he fights for what's right with his sun sword. So, is he a
Mhm.
paladin? Is he a barbarian? Sources may tell you different
A
things.
sword made of light
That's right.
because everybody wanted that shit after Star Wars.
That's right.
So,
It absolutely was. I mean, he was like Luke Skywalker with a big Wookiee companion. I mean, it's basically that cartoon had so much weirdness in it. It's like every week they were fighting some weird shit, and at the end of the day, it was basically the same fight. Oh no, some village has been threatened. We are going to go save them. Princess Ariel may or may not be captured. Ukla
mhm.
may actually figure it out before. No, I'm sorry. Ukla will probably figure it out before Thundar. Thundar will be really loud and take the credit for everything, and then everybody will be happy at the end of the end. It's so formulaic, but it was so fucking good. It's a fantastic show, and like every week you get like this conniving little swarmy guy who like tries to pretend he's a god or a wizard or like the priest of something, and usually it's because he's found some old technology from before the cataclysm, and he's trying to take over something. It's so cut and paste, and then just change the animation around a little bit. It it's almost bad, but it's like watching some of the old kung fu movies. It's so bad that it's good. um
Mm.
when people don't understand that concept. And years ago, Jason and I were both members of like this website that reviewed movies. What do they call it? Double what nowadays?
It's double toasted
Double
now, but it
toasted
used to be
now.
called spill.com.
Right. Yeah. And when Jason and I remembers the spill.com, my profile, it said, because it was so movie specific, it's like, what's your favorite movie? What's your least favorite movie? And my favorite movie was Master of the Flying Guillotine. And then my least favorite movie was Master Flying Guillotine. Both, I answered it the same for the exact same reason. It's so bad
Mhm.
that I love it, and that's kind of how Thundar is for me. But if you have any inkling of playing any type of like post-apocalyptic game, this
Yeah.
this show, 2 seasons of this show, yeah, you could take every episode and just be like, oh, Udar, the mind weaver that's trying to do such and such to this village. Yeah, that's about three sessions right there. You could definitely use and abuse
And no
Thundar.
bullshit, it's riffs.
It totally is. It totally is. It totally is. And Ukla the Mock is my spirit animal, just in case you didn't know. So
All right, so honorable mentions. I'm going to jump in with some honorable mentions. I'm just going to list them real quick. Voltron, of course, that's the 5-member team thing. Breaks down almost the same as Battle of the Planets. Cops, the show
oh
Cops,
yeah, that's a good one.
where you had futuristic Chicago, going after crime lords and whatnot. And then I will throw my last honorable mention, since I am that soap opera fan. Jem and the Holograms,
Oh
got to put them.
God.
Absolutely, Jem was it.
Well,
So what do you?
I don't know. I would think, like, if I was gonna have to do honorable mentions, Brave Star is
Oh
definitely
yeah,
up there.
Mhm.
Mm,
The Overlord.
Space Ghost. Space Ghost
Space
was
Ghost.
some crazy
Mhm.
space cosmic shit. Cast of villains from all over the place. Same basic
Yep.
show every time, but it was pretty good. And um, I think maybe Brave Star. Did I say Brave Star already?
You
I
said Brave
said
Star.
Brave Star. God, I had another one right on the. Oh, and we kind of are talking about the game, but maybe GI Joe, because like
Yes.
GI Joe, aside from what we've talked about previously about the franchise, the way that they incorporate different characters all the time, maybe have like a couple of main ones, but if you get that one person in your group that's like constantly like, I don't know what I want to play, well then just let them play a floater and come in and out. And that's what happens
Right.
all the time in the GI Joe cartoon. You'll have a
Mhm.
handful of people that you can always, every episode's going to have Storm Shadow in it. I mean, Snake Eyes in it, probably, maybe, but there's always going to be like this new person that specializes in blank, and that's because Charlie can't decide what fucking character class he likes best because he's been watching the YouTube videos again, and he thinks this is optimized, and he's got to play it this week. But next week he'll be back to a Hexblade. So,
One more honorable mention. Space Stars. I don't. It's very obscure. Space Stars was only one season. It was pretty much retellings or repeats of a lot of Hanna-Barbera stuff, like Space Ghost was definitely one of them. The Herculoids was another, but they had another uh, group called Teen Force. They were running around in the galaxy on these space bikes and stuff, and they all had different powers. You had Comet Kid and what was it, Moleculad and Electra. They all had these different powers, and they fought this dude named Uglor, who was just a big like vulture monkey because he had wings and he was like an ape with wings, and they always had to fight him. And they had Astro in the space mud. So you had Astro from the Jetsons, and he was with some other dude and a couple other dogs, and they were like comic relief type things. But that was a cool show. But I think we've run
yeah, I think
out
we've
of time
run
here.
the clock down this time.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear your comments. So, which of these shows do you remember? Which of these shows give you inspiration in your games? We want to hear it. So just hit us up on Twitter at WDND Podcast, and also email us wdndpodcast at gmail.com.
If you like what we're saying, please like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. Feel free to reach out to us and share your ideas and become part of this conversation.
All right. And from everybody here at WDND Roleplay Radio, thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.